Most people, when we came into town, I noticed that there were children jumping up and down on the trampoline, and I saw people holding hands and walking the streets and just experiencing this beautiful, beautiful place. And I realized, everywhere we go in the world, most people want the same thing. Is it pay, peace, love, peace?
Standing for freedom, freedom till he comes. 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 Standing for freedom, standing for freedom, freedom till he comes. Standing for freedom, freedom till he comes. Stand up for freedom, freedom, stand up for freedom, freedom, stand up for freedom, freedom, stand up for freedom, peace on earth and let it begin. Stand up for freedom, the word I speak will restore peace again. Let there be peace on earth, let the moment be now. When every man and woman understands their power, let there be peace. Let there be peace. Let there be peace on earth and let it extend to every border near and far. Restore peace again. Let there be peace on earth and let this be the day when all humanity will raise their voices to say, let there be peace. Let there be peace. Let there be to every border near and far. Restore peace again. Let there be peace on earth, let this be the day when all humanity will raise their voices and say, let there be peace. Sing with us. Let there be peace. Let there be peace. How can I hear you? Let there be peace. Bring it down a little bit, sing. Sing with them, come on. And let there be. There's restoration in the name of peace. Let there be. Our families are healed in the name, in the name. It's important that we each call her name, call her name. There's healing in the name of peace. Sing. There's joy in the name, in the name, in the name. Our children are safe in the
Wow, that was amazing. I'm still, let there be peace. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Laguna Beach. My name's Don West Jr., and I'm going to be your worship associate today. Carole will lead us in music, and our audio-visual assistant is the talented Mr. Dale Skarecky. Sorry, Dale. Our fellowship is served by our minister, Reverend Lee Marie Sanchez. Reverend Lee Marie provides a sermon once a month and is also here on an additional Sunday each month to be together with us in worship. But with Zoom, she's here almost every Sunday if she's not busy delivering a word somewhere else. And on other Sundays, we invite guest ministers, speakers from our community and other members to provide worship for us with a specially crafted service. And today, we have the extreme pleasure and honor of having Dr. Glenna Matthews with us, and she will lead our worship with her message entitled The Confederacy in California. This is not Glenna's first time in the UUFLB pulpit. This is not the first time with her being with us here. Dr. Glenna Matthews is a noted historian focusing many of her works on the state of California and its history, so we're very honored and pleased to have Glenna with us today, and she'll be joining us momentarily to deliver that wonderful word. In Unitarian Universalism, we accept you for who and what you are. We are a welcoming congregation with membership open to all. We subscribe to no religious creed, but have gathered a set of principles that guide us as we build a religious community together. The 7 principles that Unitarian Universalist congregations affirm and promote are located on our website, and if you had an order of service, it would be in there, but you can find it on our website under our beliefs. And I'm so happy today because we have the lovely Pat Winger here with us. Pat and I, during this COVID period, have formed our own little quarantine bubble and have supported one another over here in Henderson as the Laguna refugees. And we are going to have Pat light our chalice for us today. And the flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Everywhere UUs gather for worship, a chalice is lit. And as I've already said today, Pat is going to light our chalice for us. If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to light it as well. Well, we have an assist.
Yeah, we're having an assist. Here it goes. I'm glad you're doing this. And we have light.
And we have light. In each heart lives the flame of truth, bringing warmth and light, hope and inspiration to the human journey. Lighting our chalice on Sunday mornings is a reminder of that inner flame and of the need to nourish it and to share it with one another. It is now time for our centering thought. Our centering thought today is coming from James Baldwin, and it'll be up on your screen momentarily. It is James Baldwin's 96th birthday today. It also is Jim Pemberton's blank birthday today. I think he turns 19 years old today. Happy birthday to Jim. Happy birthday to James Baldwin. Let's take a moment and bring ourselves here and focus, and I will read our centering thought for us. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. That's from James Baldwin. And I'll take a moment right now to give you guys an announcement. On Wednesday evenings, we've been having a social justice film series focused on racial social justice right now. There's a syllabus up that's on our website. Go to the blog on our website, a wonderful do-it-yourself follow-along syllabus. James Baldwin has 2 installments already on that syllabus. He's an amazing intellectual, wonderful things. I invite all of you to join us on Wednesday evening. Reverend Lee Marie, everyone that's been involved, Rachel Daniels, our social justice warrior. We've come to the point now where we have 5 different UU congregations participating on Wednesday night. So we have a great representation. So I invite everyone to join us this Wednesday. I forget the title of the feature for this Wednesday, but it's on the syllabus. So hopefully you will all join us there. And it is now time for the lovely Carole to give us our opening hymn. Take it away, Carole. It looks like you're muted. There you go.
I'm trying to unmute. The days be dark with storms, burdens weigh my heart, troubles wait at every turn. I know I can't go on. The sorrow heals my soul, and burdens make me strong. The troubles wait at every turn. I know I can't go on. And though the journey is long, destination is near. Though troubles wait at every turn, I know I can go on. So brothers, take my hand and sisters, sing my song. And hope awaits at every turn. I know I can, I know I can, I know I can go on.
Wow, thank you so very much. The music today is what they call on fire. That was great, Carole. Thank you very much. If it feels comfortable to you, there's a short affirmation that I invite us all to read together. Dale's going to put it up on the screen. And when it comes up on the screen, you have the power to unmute yourselves. It's a little challenging when we do this, but it's really important for us to be able to hear everybody's voice together. So as the unison affirmation is coming up on the screen, I'm going to invite you to unmute yourselves and give you a little heads up and a pointer that you can't wait for you to hear the line. You have to kind of stay on pace with it as we read together. Okay, here we go. And 1, 2, 3. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community,
And to each other.
And now we're gonna have our opening words. It may look a little funny because it's printed in responsive reading format, but I'm gonna read the whole thing for us this morning. Our opening words were chosen for us by our guest speaker, Dr. Glenna Matthews, and they come from our gray hymnal. I believe it's number 527, and the words come from Frederick Douglass, and they'll be up on the screen for us all momentarily. And Frederick Douglass is one of my favorite historical figures, and luckily he's becoming famous again, so I'm hearing, because of some tweets that somebody made recently. But The Limit of Tyrants by Frederick Douglass. And I apologize for looking to my right, but the words are to the right of my screen. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. Extremely powerful words coming to us today from Frederick Douglass. Let those sink in and take a moment to think about what your role is and how you're contributing to the injustices and oppression in the world by not speaking up, by not making a demand, by not getting yourself into some good trouble, as the late John Lewis would say. Work. And Dale is going to put up a graphic on the screen that tells us how we can give in these strange times of COVID. On the left-hand side, there's two ways that you can give electronically. On the right-hand side, there's that old-fashioned system of putting a stamp on it and sending it in through what they call the snail mail. We commit together to ensure the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and for our world than they could have done alone. So we won't be having an offering today, but please give. Our church is a small church. We have a small congregation. You know, we've lost many of our very important members. It's very cool that Pat is here with us today. I met Pat because of Jean Rohn and the activities that Jean Rohn was involved in at the church. So we're a community of support. So please, if you can, if you're not currently using one of these mechanisms to support our efforts, please do so. And in gratitude for all the gifts of abundance we bring to one another, let's say thanks. And this was one of my favorite parts of the service that we don't have anymore, but when we would come together and sing from you I receive and to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. Very, very important part of what we do here in our community. So please take the time to use one of these mechanisms to support the UUFLB. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move into our meditation. As we finish the meditation and a few moments of silence, again, our musical director, Carole, will play us out of our meditation, and immediately preceding Carole's rendition, we will be graced with a video presentation that sets up the Confederacy in California, and the next voice you will hear after that will be that of Dr. Glenna Matthews, who will deliver us a few words and edify our intelligence on what is going on in the free state of California and how that played into the historical representation of the long forgotten, long gone but not forgotten Confederacy. So now, if you will join me, get yourself comfortable and rooted in your seat. Place your feet flat on the ground if you're so inclined. Find a position. Get an erect, straight spine. Take a deep breath. Enjoy the screen that Dale has put up for us, a visual of St. John's Bay out in the Atlantic Ocean. Breathe in deeply. Exhale the worries and doubts. Taking a deep breath and focus an intention on what you'd like to see change in the world today. breathe it in, and let it out. And take a few moments to breathe and focus on your intention for the day.
San Diego recently removed a marker referencing this man, Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America. But if you think this is the first time they've done so, you'd be wrong. After these Union veterans objected to commemorating Davis, whom they called a vile, murderous traitor of thousands of unarmed, helpless men, the marker was removed in 1926. Then it was added back in 1985 and removed again in 2017. Progressive ideals have come to define California, but as recent headlines indicate, the state is not without controversy. In fact, the state's been grappling with these same issues for over a century. Here's a look at Southern California's long history of Confederate controversy. If you're familiar with Southern California's Lake Cuyamaca, you may have noticed its collection of Stonewall landmarks: Stonewall Peak, Stonewall Creek, and Stonewall Trail, to name a few. The name traces to a mine constructed just after the Civil War, coined the Stonewall Jackson Mine after the late Confederate general. But when the property changed hands to a pair of pro-Union men, the Jackson was subsequently dropped. These sorts of conflicts were not out of the ordinary. Despite officially supporting the Union, California was far from unified, especially in its southern half.
When the Civil War broke out, Southern California was a hotbed of Confederate sympathy. The American flag could not be flown in the city of Los Angeles until troops came in from Fort Tejon.
That's this Fort Tejon, a Union outpost about 70 miles north of Los Angeles. Following the war, California was the only free state that refused to ratify the 14th and 15th Amendments, which freed slaves and allowed black men to vote. It was not until 1959 and 62 that the amendments were finally ratified. California's Confederate dedications first spiked following the Civil War, and then again during the Civil Rights Movement. In both cases, statues were erected as backlash against growing support for racial integration. At the center of these dedications were these women, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, a group determined to honor Confederate soldiers. Boasting 14 chapters across the state, the group found a foothold in California. In fact, no state outside of the South contained as many Confederate monuments, markers, and place names. Some of the largest of these were actually highways. The Jefferson Davis Highway and the Lee Highway, yes, Lee as in Robert E. Lee, were sponsored by the United Daughters of the Confederacy and ran from coast to coast. The organization placed commemorative markers along the routes to honor Confederate history, many of which were recently removed from California. But calls for removal actually predate their construction. The San Diego Park Commission vetoed construction of the Lee Highway marker in 1923, but were eventually overruled by the mayor. Throughout California's history, tributes like these have been widely disputed, due partially to our diverse population of westward travelers. Today, the disputes extend far beyond Confederate iconography. Some protesters have criticized monuments to Junipero Serra, the Spanish priest known for bringing Catholicism to America. Most critics cite his hand in enslaving Native Americans and eradicating their beliefs among reasons to remove the tributes. Others have disputed monuments to President Ronald Reagan, John Wayne, and Francis Scott Key for controversial racial stances. Across the state, from trees to towns, plaques to parks, conversations are being held about California's history. But while they might feel new, many are actually extensions of decades-old controversies. So the next time you see headlines like these, just know that they're probably not the first of their kind. For Cal Matters, I'm Jacob O'Hara.
Okay. It's wonderful to be here. And thank you, Don, for your excellent worship leadership. I want to say, first of all, that it's, I think, very appropriate to discuss this subject for UUs because our great ancestor, Thomas Starr King, really is part of the story. And that's why I wrote a book called California, the Golden State in the Civil War, Thomas Starr King, the Republican Party, and the Birth of Modern California. So to understand why we have all these Confederate monuments in California, or have had, and maybe we're getting rid of them pretty rapidly, you have to start with the 1850s. California in the 1850s was dominated by Southerners. There was not a majority of Southerners in the state, but some of the Southerners who came were already powerful when they got here. So there was a man named William McKendry Gwynn who came from Mississippi to California. He was part of the Constitutional Convention setting up the state. And then he became the senator, from one of the two senators from California for most of the 1850s. Now what you need to know is that William Gwynn owned 200 slaves in Mississippi the whole time that he served California in the US Senate. And that branch of the Democratic Party in California, they called themselves the Chivalry, and the nickname was the Shivs. So the Shivs really were the dominant influence. The settlement pattern in California, the Southerners were less prominent in Northern California. Years ago, I did a quantitative study of the San Jose population in 1860 and 1870, and I went back and checked. In 1860, Southerners were only 9.3% of the population of San Jose, according to my sample. But I just yesterday looked up to be sure a book about frontier Los Angeles, and the author says most Americans, that is people from the US, as opposed to immigrants from elsewhere or the Californios and natives who were already here, most Americans came from the South in frontier Los Angeles and were already accustomed to the brutalities of slavery. So California had a lot of violence in the 1850s, vigilantism in San Francisco, which was less dominated by Southerners, but it was a rough and ready place. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that Unitarians were eager to have one of their stars, a speaking star, who had been traveling around the Northeast giving Lyceum circuit speeches, and that was Thomas Starr King. He came to San Francisco from Boston in April of 1860, about a year before the war broke out. And the thing is, he was already famous when he got here because he'd been traveling the Lyceum circuit. He was pals with Transcendentalists. He was very close to Emerson. It was a great thrill reading his correspondence with Emerson. He was so famous that when he got to San Francisco, I learned from reading his correspondence, the Pony Express carried the news that he had preached the day after he arrived across the country. Thomas Starr King arrives and preaches the next day, carried by Pony Express, I think to St. Joseph, Missouri, and then it could be telegraphed from there to the Northeast where his friends were following his progress. So the public discourse in California, not only the politics, but the public discourse in California had been very antithetical to anything to do with abolition, anti-slavery, pro-Republican Party, when the Republican Party is founded as not necessarily anti-slavery, but opposed to the extension of slavery in 1854. But Republicans aren't getting elected in California. Public discourse dominated by these shivs. And then when this famous New Englander comes and begins to give speeches of a different nature, his First Unitarian Church in San Francisco has the pulpit overflowing. People are apparently hungry. And the interesting thing is, he gets here in April of 1860. That August, in fact, almost exactly, it was August 1st, 1860, that he gave a speech to the assembled Black community in San Francisco. And he said that the most glorious day in our nation's recent history was not the Declaration of Independence. Well, I shouldn't say our nation's, but in world history was not the founding of the US, but rather when the British Parliament ended slavery in the Caribbean in their colonial possessions. And August 1st was the anniversary of that. And he said that was the day that the British Parliament put its millions of pounds on the table to honor a principle that up till then had been purely abstract, that is human freedom. And so it is electrifying, as you can imagine, to the Black community. If you read the newspapers, there were Black newspapers in San Francisco. I mean, people were in tears. It was just so thrilling, and it began to have an impact. Then war breaks out in April of 1861, and even before the war, when secession had begun to take place, Lincoln is elected in November of 1860. South Carolina secedes in December, and other southern states begin to follow. And in Washington's birthday in 1861, Thomas Starr King gave a very rousing speech that attracted a lot of attention, upholding the values of the Union. And one of the interesting things that I found reading, I was able to read some correspondence of the pro-Confederates, of the Shivs, and one of them, who actually was the governor of California, John Downey, writes to somebody in Southern California and says, "Oh, we hear a black Republican now." And that's, of course, Thomas Starr King. And black was used as a metaphor for someone who is supporting the values of abolition and pro-union. So the war breaks out. We don't have any idea how many Confederates there were in California, but there were enough of them to make considerable trouble. Not surprisingly, they were concentrated in Southern California. As you learned in the clip, the Union flag could not be flown in Los Angeles until troops came in from Fort Tejon. I don't know how many of you have, when you come on 5 past the Grapevine, there's Fort Tejon State Park, and you can go there and actually find information about this whole episode. So in my book, I divide the Confederates in California during the Civil War into 3 categories. First, there are people who were obviously sympathetic, but kind of kept their mouths shut. And there was, for example, a businessman in Southern California named Benjamin Wilson, or he got here when it was still Mexican California, so he called himself Don Benito Wilson. And Don Benito, I know from reading his correspondence, was ardently for the South, but he was in partnership with a man named Phineas Banning, who was one of the top businessmen in Southern California then, and was pro-union. So Wilson had his pro-South sympathies, but he kind of muted them and worked with a union supporter because it was good business. Then there was another category of people who stayed in California after the war broke out, but they were very vocal in support of the Confederacy. And there were 2 newspapers in particular. There was one in Visalia, and as it happens, I lived in Visalia as a child. I did not know this history when my dad was the editor of a newspaper, the Visalia Times Delta, briefly, after we left Laguna the first time. And so anyhow, I think it was the Visalia Times Expositor. It was so treasonous, it was so pro-Confederacy that the federal government, the Union government, set up a camp right outside of Visalia to kind of monitor trouble. It was Camp Babbitt was the name, and you can read about, you know, various rumbles between the people, the soldiers at Camp Babbitt and the pro-Southerners in the Visalia area. Closer to home, there was a violently pro-Confederate, and these people were voicing treason. They were saying, you know, yay for every Confederate victory, saying scurrilous things about Lincoln. And anyhow, it was the Los Angeles Star here. The editor of that got in legal trouble, but it didn't last long. But I think the paper went out of business. And then there was Ben Wilson and his kind, who, you know, were sympathizers, but they were mostly mum. Then there were the ones who stayed in California and were vocal. And then there were others who left to try and fight for the Confederacy. When the war broke out, the most prominent, rather the man who was the commandant of the Pacific region's federal troops was a man named Albert Sidney Johnston. And he was a Southerner. And when the war broke out, Lincoln relieved him of duty fairly quickly because people didn't trust his sympathies. Johnston goes from San Francisco, comes down to Southern California, and shortly thereafter makes his way across the desert with a contingent, winds up in Texas, and ultimately winds up as a top Confederate general. In fact, at that point, he outranked Robert E. Lee. And he was killed at the Battle of Shiloh, the highest ranking officer on either side to die in the course of the war. He was killed April 7th, 1862. I became quite interested in him because he seemed in some ways like a pretty honorable man. And so my family and I, my daughter and granddaughter and I, made a pilgrimage to Shiloh to you can see a marker at the spot. This is why I thought he was honorable. He, during the heat of the battle, he had a personal surgeon, and he heard that some Union troops needed medical attention, and he sent his personal doctor to tend to troops. And while he was by himself, he was hit in the leg by a bullet and bled to death for lack of medical attention. So anyhow, Johnston winds up fighting for the Confederacy. William Gwynn and a bunch of people of his more extreme pro-Confederate ilk, they go to, they get on board a ship, and they travel the reverse of people who are coming to California. They go down to Panama, across the isthmus, and then up the East Coast, and somehow they got to the Confederacy. So I read letters from William Gwynn that, oh, this is a drag being here in Mississippi with a war going on. I really miss California. What a wonderful country. And sadly, after, I mean, the Union won, but after the war ended, William Gwynn came back to California, and he's buried in Oakland. So, so three categories. And again, here's something, a place you can go if you're interested in this history. A lot of these people that were trying to make their way to the Confederacy, there was a stagecoach trail that they were taking that came right by Temecula. And if you go to Temecula, the local history museum there has information about all the people who tried to get to the Confederacy taking that stagecoach trail. So anyhow, there were certainly Confederate sympathizers. Some of them were actively treasonous. And what struck me was, even though some of them got in legal trouble, they got in legal trouble for doing real things. It's so different from the way we treated the Japanese during World War II, when we imprisoned a whole group of people of color simply because they were the enemy race. I think the Confederate sympathizers got off pretty light in a time of war. So after the war ends, the Emancipation Proclamation, people I think don't give Lincoln enough credit for how controversial it was at the time. And there were a lot of people in California who were unhappy about the Emancipation Proclamation. And Starr King dies in March 4th, 1864, the most eloquent voice for white voice for anti-racism. Lincoln, of course, is assassinated the following year. California kind of lapses back to what it had been in the 1850s. That's why William Gwynn felt comfortable coming back. And as you see from that little video, the state did not ratify the 14th and 15th Amendments, which to me is absolutely shocking. I did not realize that was the case until I started writing this book. So it became a very comfortable place for Confederate veterans to come after the war. And that's why you have all these United Daughters of the Confederacy chapters all over California. And so now this state, this is a history that is very little known. It really gripes me that California schools don't teach California history more fully, other than, you know, a glamorized version of the missions. But our state, we were a free state. Starr King launched a fundraising campaign for the federal troops, and more money was raised in California than in any other state, free state in the country. Our gold in the early days of the war, it was shipped from San Francisco, and again, that circuitous route it didn't go, it wasn't the property of the federal government, but it went into northeastern banks, and it reassured people who were buying federal bonds, either Americans or Europeans, that the Union was going to be solvent. So California Gold reinforced the solvency of the Union. California Gold paid for hospitals and relief for soldiers in the field. It's not, the Confederates didn't hold sway to the extent of preventing that, but they became that strain became dominant again after the war, and it's something I think we're reckoning with now. And let me just end by saying that I found out recently, after the war, you have the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Sons of Confederate Veterans, etc. But there was also a group of Union veterans, the Grand Army of the Republic. And Union veterans flocked to join the Grand Army of the Republic. And I found out from one of my friends who's with long roots in Laguna Beach that there was actually a Grand Army of the Republic encampment in Laguna on the beach in the late 19th century. So with that, I will end, and it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much, Glenna. And Glenna has been kind enough to make herself available for questions. So we have a few minutes to entertain questions for Dr. Matthews. Does anyone have a question right off the top?
So I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm curious, you mentioned that the gold that came out of California was used to shore up the northern efforts. Were there attempts from the southern part of the state to provide financial assistance to the Confederacy directly?
No, but there were attempts. Oh boy, this is a really this is a good one. There was this really kind of crazy guy named Asbury Harpending who went to San Francisco, a young pro-Southern guy, and he engaged in a conspiracy, and the idea was that they were going to seize a ship in San Francisco Harbor, take control of it, and go down the coast to Baja, and then prey and then intercept a shipment of gold. And then that would have been used for the Confederacy. The unfortunate thing for Mr. Harpending, and the fortunate thing for us, is that he couldn't resist, or he or his Confederates couldn't resist bragging about it, and they were overheard and they were apprehended. And when I say that Confederates were treated generously, Alcatraz was actually turned into before there was a federal prison, Alcatraz was used to, this is another place if you're interested in this history, Alcatraz was used as a prison during the Civil War. And so Harpending spent some time in Alcatraz, but as far as I'm concerned, not long enough. Pretty outrageous thing that he was attempting, you know?
Yeah. Thank you.
Did Starr King face any backlash for his pro-union views?
Not that I'm aware of. He was greatly lionized, but after he died in March of 1864, it was a year before the war ended, and this flow of money to something called the U.S. Sanitary Commission that was organized it was not a governmental entity. It was a volunteer organization, but they were the ones that were equipping doctors and nurses. And before there was a profession of nurses, there were, women going off to help. And they were reliant on California gold. They were reliant. And in fact, this is another material part of the story. The transcontinental telegraph line is completed in 1862. And then it becomes possible to wire money across the country. So I I've seen this correspondence where somebody in New York says, oh my, you know, we just gotta, you know, Starr King put his mind to raising money, and in a week he collected $100,000 from the business community of San Francisco. That's in 1862 dollars. And, you know, here are these people in New York trying to pay for this whole enterprise, and they get this, you know, wire. It was pretty exciting. And so he, then when he died, the denomination organized a group of Unitarian ministers. And this correspondence I read at the New York Public Library, these guys are going sometimes by muleback into gold communities in the Sierra foothills and all over the state, trying to, you know, prime the pump to get the money coming into the headquarters in San Francisco. And for example, El Monte in Southern California was the hotspot of, it was populated by pro-Southerners who were the Monte Boys, they were known as. And so I've seen a letter that one of these Unitarian ministers writes to headquarters saying, well, I gave my talk and the front row was full of men with Bowie knives. So they had to be pretty gutsy to do what they were doing. So that's the pushback that I'm aware of.
Steve, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask just how unusual California was. So in other words, what can we say about, let's say, New Mexico and Arizona with California? It was just it just was normal in the South, to calling us part of the South, to believe, you know, it support the Confederacy, or was California unique?
New Mexico and Arizona were much more sparsely populated. Little known is the fact that the Confederacy actually invaded from Texas into New Mexico, and they were defeated without doing much damage. Jefferson Davis always had his eye on the precious metals, not only in California, but by this time there have been discoveries of silver in Colorado and Nevada, and that was the goal of invading at that point. But California is unique because the gold, I once heard a talk that made a big impression on me. A historian said that if you look at all the gold that was circulating in the world from 1492 to the time of the Civil War, the overwhelming majority, as I recall, but more than half, was what was mined in California between the discovery of gold and the Civil War. So that gave us a unique position, and you know, all kinds of things having to do with our state economy were reflective of the fact that we were unique in having all that gold circulating. Just to give you an idea, I told you that there's all this fundraising going on for the Sanitary Commission. I came across a letter saying that at a bake sale in Benicia, I believe it was in Benicia, somewhere in that area, they raised $3,486 at a bake sale in 1860s dollars. And then Mark Twain actually has something in one of his writings about how this operated. Somebody would bid on a sack of flour, and then they would donate it back. And so the same sack of flour was used repeatedly. So maybe 2 people baked cakes. And anyhow, it was just an astonishing, relative to the rest of the country, amount of circulating medium that was happening then.
Mr. Oakley.
Yeah, Glenna, to what extent do we have Confederate monuments or geographical features named after Confederates in California today?
I think there are very few remaining, Oakley. There's an excellent article. There's a guy named Kevin Waite who's a recent PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, who's now, because of the academic job market in this country, teaching in the UK. But he had an article about this in the most recent issue of the journal California History, and they are coming down rapidly.
Did I see your hand, Miss Noreen? You're muted, you're on mute.
Okay. I was thinking that there's another factor at this period after the gold rush that drew people too, because California was a big, a series of large ranchos, if I remember right. And, you know, it was easy to gain property rights by marrying a señorita in California. And you see that San Juan Capistrano, for example, had that situation. And, you know, people could get really very wealthy, you know, if they did it the right way. And Don Benito, that was an example of the name changes that happened during that. But
that good point, Noreen, but that was primarily before the large influx of Americans. When there was a large influx of Americans, they didn't bother marrying. They just squatted on the land and then defied. I mean, there was a huge loss of land by the people, the Mexican Americans. Well, that's not Californios, I guess is the term I should use. Californios, and William Gwynn, needless to say, was not on the side of the Angels in this one.
We have the time for one more question. Do we have one more question? And Linda, you get the winning.
Muted.
You're muted. You're still on mute. There you.
Glenna, what became of the Star King statue that was replaced by Ronald Reagan's?
Oh yeah, that statue. Just to give background to people, Thomas Starr King and Junipero Serra were the two statues representing California in the nation's capital until 2006. At that point, a Democratic-controlled state legislature voted to replace Thomas Starr King's statue with Ronald Reagan. So now our diverse, wonderful state is represented by Father Serra and Ronald Reagan.
Don't cry.
At the time, this was in 2006, I first learned that the state legislature, it was kind of in the, you know, it was like a throwaway. They gave no thought to it, where the original choices had been the subject of, you know, a years-long discussion. And I get a phone call from a stringer from the New York Times asking me, you know, if I had anything to say about Thomas Starr King. It's like, whoa, I'm very surprised. So the denomination asked me to organize a letter writing campaign or to do something. And it was just before there was a convention of Western historians, and I got all kinds of prominent people in the field to sign a petition, not necessarily to keep Starr King, but to have a more deliberative process if you're going to make a big change. And I faxed it to Arnold Schwarzenegger and never got any kind of a response. So the statue that left Washington is now in Sacramento. And the good news is that Sacramento UUs and others who go to Sacramento to lobby often, it's in the Capitol grounds. So people who who are there to make good trouble in Sacramento can rally at the Thomas Starr King statue and proceed to make their good trouble.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glenna Matthews. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a more informed, a more complete history of California, including the influence of UUs along the way. Thank you so very much, so very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end of our time together today. So please put your tray tables and seats in their full upright position. As we come in for a landing, And as it was the Lady Pat's honor to light our chalice, if you have one lit at home, we're gonna extinguish our chalice. And as we extinguish this flame, knowing the light remains in the warmth and compassion of our hearts until we are together again. Thank you so much, Pat Winger, the lovely Pat Winger. So ladies and gentlemen, another service has concluded. The second most favorite part of my service is when we used to all stand up and grab hands, and strangers and visitors would look at us like what we were doing, what is going on here. Now we will have the lovely Carole lead us in Let There Be Peace on Earth, and we will follow that with a virtual cafe so you can continue to chat with one another. Take it away, Carole.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it be.